I hadn't intended to do so many videos on religion in such a short time, but like everybody else, I've been playing a lot of Hades recently. The dating sim with roguelike elements is deeply invested in its particular spin on Greek mythology, and mythology has always been a point of interest for me, so while I got reacquainted with the gods, I couldn't help but thinking. Magic has 36 cards with a god type, and that'll be our focus for today, with Kaldheim coming fairly soon, and a rendition of the Norse gods expected to debut with it. I thought we'd have a look back at how Magic has handled its mythic figures thus far. These 36 cards cover 24 characters, the 15 gods of Theros, the 8 gods of Amonkhet, and Illharg the Raise-Boar, may he never see the city. The gods have an interesting mix of jobs in Magic the Gathering. They aim to be a phenomenal, show-stopping game piece that grabs your attention, and they're a huge part of the lore and world building of their various planes, but they're also acting as a bridge from our world to the world of Magic the Gathering. Theros is Magic's take on Greece, for instance, and so while the gods are unique original characters, do not steal, they also have to be reminiscent of the Greek pantheon, or at least of our pop culture conception of it. They have to feel Greek to sell that this is Magic's take on Greece. And that balance isn't really a trivial one to uphold. So let's meet the roster of gods that Wizards has created and have a look into what their possible origins might be. You are listening to Building Better Dungeons, and let's chat deities. Heliod. As the de facto head of the Theros gods and god of the sky, Heliod seems quite close to Zeus, the god who ruled the heavens and the Olympians in Greek mythology. He is described as barring mortals from the mystic night sky, the Nyx, in a similar way that the original Zeus tried to bar mortals from fire, and like Zeus, Heliod is fickle and proud, though his eventual fate is certainly a reference to Atlas, being forced to bear the world on his shoulders. And the sun connection has certain connotations with Apollo, the Greek god of the sun. Heliod certainly seems like a clear translation of Zeus to me. Thassa. Thassa, however, bears little in common with her counterpart, Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea. Yes, she wields a bident, which is a clear reference to the Greek ocean deity's trident, but Thassa is feminine, calm, plodding, and slow to anger. Nothing like the hot-headed Poseidon, who was also the god of earthquakes, because he liked to whip them up whenever anything didn't go his way. Like Triton, she is half fish, but that's kind of where her similarities with Triton end. The clear inspiration here, though, is definitely Thalassa, a primeval sea spirit, not a ruler of the ocean, but the ocean itself. The name is so direct as to be a pretty unambiguous allusion. Unlike Helion, Thassa is a mix of many mythic menaces, but each element is still directly pulled from the old tales, so that she still feels distinctly Greek. But what about Erebus? A whip-wielding god of the dead, Erebus is a mix of Erebus, primordial spirit of the dark, and Hades. Hades and Erebus both invest a lot of time in infrastructure that prevents the dead from escaping the underworlds that they rule, and Erebus's horns are quite distinctive. They seem starkly reminiscent of the Celtic god Cernunnos, actually, who is a god of bidirectionality, which is pretty ironic because Erebus wants mortals to go one way and one way only when it comes to the underworld. The whip that Erebus wields is actually pretty unique. There aren't a lot of whips in mythology, or scours, or scourges, or whatever you want to call them. The Erinyes, Greek figures who would punish the wicked, did so with whips, and so perhaps this is the illusion that Erebus' signature weapon is going for. Although perhaps not. Based on the card, it seems that this whip is for rousing the dead to work, more than punishing the souls of the underworld. Perforos. Few gods in this video are going to be as direct as Perforos. He's just Hephaestus, Greek god of the forge, through and through. Both live in volcanoes, both are gods of the forge, and invention and creation, and though Perforos is angrier, and more volatile, and less disfigured, the corollary here is very direct, so that's his case closed. Nylea. Nylea owes a lot to Artemis, Greek goddess of the hunt, most famed of the Olympiads for her skill with a bow and arrow. Both of these gods are associated with forests, and both punish hunters for hunting sacred animals for sport. Like Perforos, Nylea is alarmingly direct in her allusions to her inspiration. She is a total bullseye. I'm not keeping this in the... Ifara! As we leave the main 5 gods of Theros behind, we find the deities a little more obscure and harder to pin down from this point on. As a god of civilization and architecture, Ifara shares certain vibes with Hestia, goddess of the hearth, but also with Athena, god of wisdom and plans. The fact that Ifara is the patron god of Miletus, biggest city in Theros, Seems like a reference to the story of the founding of Athens, which is, unsurprisingly, named after Athena. And the fact that Ephara carries a jar is a reference to the myth of Ganymede, a similar water-bearing woman. Mechanically though, Ephara wants you to build up a board of creatures. She wants you to build a civilization. With that in mind, it looks like both Hestia and Athena are intended to be Ephara's inspirations. Phenax, a god of deceit, treachery, and the subversion of rules, Phenax was explicitly a mortal who ascended to godhood after escaping the underworld. In this way, Phenax is almost a stand-in for Greek heroes like Orpheus and Odysseus and their ilk, characters who get by based on treachery, quick wits, and who subvert rules and defy gods. Some of those heroes do eventually ascend to the stars and become gods themselves. The Greek inspiration for Phenax is clear. Mogus. Mogus is a god of slaughter, war, cannibalism, and violence. Sounds lovely. Athena and Ares are the war deities in Greek mythology, though there is little of the wise and kind Athena in Mogus. It seems that Mogus is based on the darker and more bloodthirsty side, Ares, who, with his chariot of fear and dread, and love of violence and discord, could become plenty ugly. Mogus is a minotaur, which has been in magic for quite some time, and does originate in Greek mythology. It's funny how the minotaur, despite being just one of the obstacles that Theseus overcomes in his story, has become a much larger part of our conception of Greek mythology. So much so that they had to be represented in god form when magic went to Greece. Xenagos. Xenagos was an ascended mortal, a satyr who became so famous for his ability to lead droves of people and monsters that he ascended to godhood. He would have been the god of revelry if it weren't for the almost immediate demise he had at the hand of Elspeth Tyrell. As a god of revels, his clearest analogy would have been Dionysus, Greek god of revels, but as a satyr, the god of the wilds, Pan, certainly has some claim to Xenagos as well. Xenagos partied very hard, and the inducing of extreme emotions does relate back to Pan. That's actually where our word for panic comes from. Xenagos' ascendancy doesn't go well for him either. He's full of hubris, which is a Greek hamartia or fatal flaw that many heroes had. It sees them fall from grace after they are too proud or arrogant. Xenagos could have spent a long time doing whatever. He was a planeswalker, he could have gone to many different worlds, but the thing that Xenagos wanted was to ascend to godhood. If he'd done almost anything else, his story would have been quite different. That's Greek tragedy through and through. Clothis. Clothis is a very direct. She's based on Clotho, one of the Greek fates, the weaver of the thread of destiny. So too does Clothis weave her threads of destiny. Clothis has a secondary role as a guardian of the underworld who prevents would-be extralopers from escaping, and there are a variety of such figures in Greek mythology, none of whom are particularly close to Clothis in any way or the other. But yes, her two main elements, as a weaver of fate and as a protector of the underworld, both very Greek, so Clothis is Greek through and through. Karametra. Karametra's domain is the same as Demeter's, the god of the harvest, grain, and agriculture. Karametra has a past as a more sinister god of sacrifice and death, and a current habit of wielding a scythe, and both of those are interesting and subtle nods to Thanatos, the spirit of death, but Demeter is Karametra's primary inspiration without much doubt. An interesting side note here is that Karametra calls Nylea her sister. We don't know if this is reciprocated, but one of the big points of difference in Greek and Therosian mythology is this theme of family. There are two pairs of siblings in this way in Theros, but the Greek mythology is really the story of one big dysfunctional family. It's just interesting to me that that was lost in translation. Athreos. Athreos is a god of death and passage and ferries the dead from the world of the living to the underworld. The allusion to Charon, the Greek ferryman who served the exact same purpose with the exact same technique, is direct. Interestingly, though black-white is the color combination most associated with greed, Athreos does not need payment the same way that Charon does to do his duty. In fact, based on his card in Theros Beyond Death, Athreos seems to be giving his passengers coins. So, I mean, that's nice. Moving on, Keranos. Funnily enough, Keranos' two inspirations are the same as Helios, Zeus and Apollo. Zeus's lightning is more prominent now in pop culture than it was in the original mythology. Zeus was a sky god who happened to own lightning bolts, as opposed to a god of lightning. But we remember him like this, and this is what Keranos leans into. Apollo was the god of oracles and future sight, and Keranos gives visions of what is to come to his followers, but dooms them to be incapable of averting these fates. This alludes to Cassandra, the woman who could see disaster but never avert it herself. Keranos is wildly different to Heliod despite their similar background, and I think this is an interesting showcase of the depth on display in the OG Pantheon. There really is so much to draw from that even this Pantheon, made as it is from rearranging constituent parts, is distinct, new, and interesting. Erois. The centaur god of victory, Erois is a male equivalent to Nike, Greek goddess of victory. His status as a centaur and connection with heroics might be a nod to Charon, the famous centaur who trained many heroes. But Erois is one of the gods we know not too much about, so male Nike is as best as we can do, or it would be if it weren't for one more side fact. Erois and Mogus, the god of slaughter we just talked about, are brothers. So Ares and Athena are also siblings, and in this way we see the two sides of war on Theros. Erois, god of victory, triumph, and glory, and Mogus, the other side of that coin, the god of slaughter, violence, wickedness. Similarly, the Greek war siblings showcased the planning and wisdom on one side with Athena and the violence and terror on the other with Ares. It seems that both Greek mythology and Therosian mythology would like to paint interesting pictures of wartime using their selection of deities. Pharika. This Gorgon is a goddess of poisons and medicines both. She exists as a fun justification of why people are so eager to hunt out monsters in Theros. She hides medicine in the bodies of the most fearsome monsters, and she does it on purpose as a joke. Pharika is an even mix of the witchcraft and poisons god Hecate, and the god of medicine Asclepius, whose symbol is two twisted snakes, so that's for fun. She also clues us in that our conception of Greek mythology in pop culture matters just as much in Theros as any of the OG source material. The Gorgons were not very important figures in their time. They featured mainly as Medusa, who Perseus killed one time. Ovid later gave her a backstory as a part of his communist makeover of the Greek mythology, and then that was that, until we revitalized Medusa and the Gorgons completely in our modern retellings. And now she's one of the more famous elements of the mythology, so much so that she demanded deific status when magic came to Greece. Crufix. Crufix, the formless god of horizons, potentials, and distant things, is a reference to the primordials of Greek mythology, the more abstract concepts that spawned from primordial chaos and shaped the earth. Gaia, Uranus, Ether, Kronos, and the like. Crufix was the first of the gods to be formed from primordial Nyx, saw his siblings be formed in tow. He is as primordial as the formless Greek forces he bears such similarity to. Crufix is somewhat of a deep cut. Everyone knows Zeus, everyone has a picture of Zeus in their mind, and some even might know of Zeus's father, Kronos, if they're a tiny bit nerdy and into this Greek mythology stuff. But these more abstract primal forces haven't really penetrated into pop culture at all, and so it's nice to see them here. Though Theros is mostly made up from how we remember the Greeks, little kernels of the real thing have made it through, and I think it's the better for it. That's us done with Greece. The Egyptian pantheon is considerably less well known. Everyone has an image, as I said, of Zeus in their heads, but Sekhmet and Ra, not so much. As such, the Egyptian-inspired gods of Amonkhet are all a little bit harder to pin down. If we look at Oketra, the cat-headed god of stability, order, and protection, well, there are two cat-headed gods in Egypt and its mythology that might give inspiration to Oketra. Bastet, the cat-headed god of protection and family, with ties to the sun, and Sekhmet, a lion-headed god of war and healing, that might be giving Oketra the fiercer side that she uses in battle. But then again, neither of these are archers, neither of them are particularly Oketra-like. They all have more things going on than their similarities with Oketra, and with a mythology as deep as Egypt's, odds are that you could give me any couple of traits and I'd be able to find a couple of gods that share them. Oketra is one of the few gods who ventures outside of the main city in Nakhdamon to ward off threats, and this kind of protector role is played by Bastet, as she protected Ra as he drove the sun across the sky. But if all the Amonkhet gods are going to be this much of a reach, then this video will be more of a calisthenics workout than I've had in months. Kefnet. Kefnet is a direct allusion to Thoth, ibis-headed god of knowledge and wisdom, and I do mean direct. Aside from their animal and domains, both are fond of illusions, and Thoth had the job of maintaining the shape of the universe, much as Kefnet maintains the Hekma, which protects the city of Nakhdamon from the horrors of Amonkhet. As much as Oketra was weird and vague, Kefnet is very direct. Bontu. This crocodile-headed god of the dead and of ambition. Well, there are many Egyptian gods who go about making Bontu what she is. Sobek is the main god with a crocodile for a head, and he is the god of the Nile. But Bontu is actually nothing like him outside of the physical similarities. She's conniving, ambitious, and wiser than the animal intellect Sobek could ever be. Bontu's status as a god whose temples truly test whether Amonkhet's initiates are willing to kill each other is a dark echo of the Amid, a crocodile creature that would devour the hearts of the unworthy. But it's the jackal-headed Set, full of pride and ambition, that seems the most similar to me. Set betrays his brother Osiris, as Bontu betrayed her brothers and sisters by allying with Nicol Bolas in his plot to corrupt her world. Hazaret. Hazaret bears little similarity to any Egyptian god, and I have looked, guys, there just isn't anything particularly like her. There's no god of zeal or fervour in Egyptian mythology, not particularly, and she bears no real similarity to any of the jackal-headed gods that are walking around. Hazaret fits right in with her pantheon, but she's much less grounded in the Egyptian mythology than they are. There's an implication that Hazaret was once gentler, like a god of love, or something, and this is a theory that Samut voices. There are Egyptian gods that would better fit that descriptor, but, I mean, who's to say one way or the other? We don't have too much information about that, and as it stands, Hazaret's just a little bit adrift. Ronus. Though Wajat is an Egyptian god with a snake head, we're not having much luck there because she's a childbirth deity, and Ronus is not that. He's a lot more similar to Apis, actually, the bull god of strength, stubbornness, and determination, because those are things that Ronus can value and get behind. Interestingly though, for a god of strength, Ronus isn't that strong. He's broken to pieces by the much stronger Scorpion god, and his main viziers are actually more interested in poisons than any kind of strength. If you're following the theory that Nicol Bolas corrupted these gods, perhaps once Ronus was a god like Serket, a life-giving god of poisons and medicines, before he was corrupted by Nicol Bolas' hands. The insect gods. Little is known about the scorpion, scarab, or locust gods. We know that once they were more regular gods like the other five, but were again corrupted by the god emperor, although to much more extreme degrees than their brethren. The scorpion god killed the five gods of Naktamun, the scarab god rose the many heroes of Naktamun from the grave as eternal zombie warriors, and the locust god destroyed the Hekma, the barrier that was keeping Naktamun safe. Interestingly, many of the five gods of Naktamun we have now have similarities with the races of Naktamun. The Kenra are jackal-headed, just like Hazaret, and the Aven have ibis heads, just like Kefnet, and the Naga are snake-like, like Ronus. However, there are minotaurs with bull's heads, and Aven with hawk's heads, who seem unrepresented. Was the scorpion god maybe a bull-headed god of strength before Nicol Bolas got to him? Was the locust god a hawk-headed god of flight or hunting? And Oketra and Bontu, cat-headed and crocodile-headed as they are, there aren't sentient cat or crocodile people on Amonkhet, but those animals are important in Amonkhet's world and ecosystem. Perhaps the necromantic scarab god was once a camel-headed god of endurance. It's impossible now to say. Whatever these gods were, now they are ruined by the cruelty of Bolas, and what's more, because Bolas' plans ultimately failed, they are ruined for absolutely nothing. Heartbreaking. The other god of magic the Gathering is Illharg the Raiseborer, who, despite having a card, canonically has actually never appeared in the story. Wild, that decision. The Gruul worship him as a god of destruction, and honestly, boars are a great animal for that. They are wild, unlike domesticated pigs, they are free and destructive. Illharg could be a reference to the Caledonian boar, a great destructive presence that Artemis unleashed to destroy the kingdom of a man who slighted her. But maybe Illharg is just a destructive animal. I mean, boars are awful, awful creatures that ruin everything they touch. They are the humanity of the animal kingdom. And yeah, that appears to be that. The 35 god cards of Magic the Gathering showcase 24 different characters, and each is a welcome call to the ancient mythologies they hail from. I hope you had fun with this esoteric deep dive into Magic's mythical makeup. These videos wouldn't happen without the work of these lovely patrons. Yeah, thanks for watching. Safe home.